This question, Lynn, is from a, he's not an economist. He's asked questions before. He is principally an economic historian and an expert on the FDR period. He works very closely with the Stanford group, and he raises a very particular question. He says, Lynn, as I'm sure you're aware, in the fall of 1933, Harry Hopkins was very worried about the onset of winter. Since May of that year, he had served in FDR's administration as head of the new, and in fact the first program that had ever existed to distribute funds to the unemployed. As you know, at that time, neither unemployment insurance nor food stamps nor welfare had yet come into existence. Only a small handful of states had relief programs, and they were all broke. And certainly private charity was in even worse shape. Hopkins feared that millions of Americans would be without food or shelter in the coming cold months. In October, he met with President Roosevelt, and he proposed something very new, a federal jobs program that he said would be temporary, that would see the nation through the winter. It would employ 4 million people, and at the time, he said it would last for 4 months. Roosevelt did a very quick calculation and figured that it would cost about $400 million. He decided to take that money from the budget of the Public Works Administration, run by his Secretary of the Interior, Harold Ickes. In time, the PWA would build what could only be called enduring monuments, like the Bonneville and Boulder Dams, the Triborough and Oakland Bay bridges, and the carriers Enterprise and Yorktown, which ended Japan's advance across the Pacific at the Battle of Midway. But the problem was that the PWA was slow to get up and running. As Roosevelt himself later wrote, the delay was the result of what were the unavoidable time-consuming processes of planning, designing, and reviewing projects, and then clearing up legal matters, advertising for bids, and getting contracts. Hopkins, as Roosevelt was fully aware, intended to short-circuit those processes. In fact, he skipped them altogether. Nobody could say that it was an example of Management 101, but as Hopkins frequently pointed out, hunger is not debatable. Obviously, what happened in that period, both by the standards of 1933 and for that matter for the standards of 2010, were absolutely astounding. Hopkins' initiative and his ambition, I believe, should be a model for our response to today's crisis. Certainly, things are easily as bad and are in danger of getting worse. My question to you is that, on the one hand, we as a group are working very hard on large-scale projects along the lines of the kind of projects that were pursued by the PWA. However, there are certain immediate needs that would seem to require a Harry Hopkins type approach. My question to you is, how do we balance the two, and what is it that you think we could do immediately versus the kind of longer range projects that we all agree on?
Well, first of all, we have to have some immediate reversal of the social trends, economic social trends inside the United States. We're now in the process of a breakdown crisis, if this is allowed to continue. So therefore, we're going to have to be very pragmatic, but also very systematic at the same time. And I don't think there's really a conflict caused by that, from my experience in management and so forth. You can do that. What you do is you make an inventory of what your what your desires might be and what your options are. And our concern is to have, well, like, we used to do in the post-war period. The Eisenhower Highway Program is an example of this. The Eisenhower Highway Program was to develop actually it was also a national defense program, because the assumption was that under conditions of nuclear war, any major war would result in the railroad system would be easily disrupted, and therefore the idea was to get a lot of highways out there and a highway system which could substitute for a rail system which would be in jeopardy under wartime conditions. So they got the idea of building this new highway system, and somebody got the bright idea of adding to that the suburban system. He began to get mushrooms, especially around outside of Philadelphia. Mushrooms would grow up of whole new communities, so-called communities, which we rue today. It's an absolute disaster. Social disaster, intellectual disaster, moral disaster, everything else. So, but what it demonstrates is that if you can be intelligent enough to use resources for things that are actually needed, and can find the applications of these in areas where you can do the job, then do it and put it there. But what you have to do is integrate the plan for where you intend to go, which is, I think, what the Roosevelt administration really did. You have a plan as I saw it back then. You have a plan for where you intend to go, and this continued to the post-war period. Then you fit your allocation of resources to deal with the social crisis. For example, we had a policy for some time in the United States of signing a new step on the completion of the highway system in an area, a county where there was low unemployment, low employment or high unemployment. And we would do it that way. This was very satisfactory to the local politicians who were glad to see this thing coming in to that territory. And we, in a sense, minimize the number of areas which were in distressed condition, because the stimulus of something going in those areas would help. So what we need is a master plan of what the overall objectives are for our economy. In other words, don't say we're going to grow the economy. That thing, it makes me sick every time we hear the term. What we're going to do is increase the relative population potential, through advances in technology or infrastructure and industries. We're going to concentrate on areas where we can increase the energy flux density, particularly in modes of production, and where we need it, essentially. And you're going to do this as your general policy. You're going to take a map of where we want to go as a nation for the next 2 generations, and you have to think in 2 generations. Then you make your map, your commitments, which are flexible. You can add to it as you go along. And then you take your money, your financial resources, and your skills. And you try to match the 2. This is the project. We want to complete this project, but here's the place in which we would like to prefer to advance the project, because here's where we need the economic stimulus. And the same thing applies not only to areas, it applies to types of things. Today, what we need, the thing we can succeed in because of the poor quality of the labor force today, that is the labor force we intend to bring in as a factor, is so poor we have to go to large-scale projects like basic economic infrastructure and recruit into those, and use that as the basic way to stimulate employment and relief in these communities. We have to build up a system that we had before. You have to build up a system of a national system, a state system, and a state and local and county system. You have to build these things up. So therefore, that's your map. Now you define the map as intersecting something that is necessary in terms of projects. Now you allocate priorities in areas where you have a social effect that you need. And it'll work, because the benefits will spill. And if you're increasing the amount of trade, of useful trade inside the national economy and in regional economies, you'll find it will tend to work. What happens? Labor is somewhat flexible. people will move temporarily or permanently to areas where the opportunities exist. If the housing prices are not too high, as they are today, because of the speculative factor. But that's the way to do it. Make the map, decide what the technological, which is not done too much, the technological objectives, decide what the programs are of infrastructure, power. We want a lot of nuclear power. Let's get that clear. No carbon cap nonsense. That will kill people. Plants contain carbon. Plants, green plants, convert sunlight into plants and things that human beings need. Life is promoted by carbon. Of course, you've got the carbon head called Obama, the former Vice President, Gore, carbon head. We put all the excess carbon in his head, it probably does him good. But anyway, the point, we're doing the wrong things right now. That's one of our problems in seeing how to solve these problems. What we need is high energy flux density. We need nuclear power for many reasons. Nothing less than nuclear power. We will use things in emergency for other ways, but we are going, as Russia's going, as China is going, as India is going, we're going to nuclear power and thermonuclear power. That's the way we're going to go, or that's the way we're going to die if we don't do it. So since we intend to live, we're going to have nuclear power. We're going to have thermonuclear power. We're going to also have a higher order form of power, which will, in space is particular. We're going to develop it. So we're going in this direction, higher energy flux density, more green through carbon. The chlorophyll process, which gives you the carbon cycle. And we want chlorophyll, we don't want goers. We want chlorophyll. And within those kinds of parameters of what are the general, what we call the dynamic characteristics of growth in society, we take that, make a national plan on infrastructure, intention on infrastructure, intention on industries, intention on technologies, and let it fly. And then apply what we have as resources to the best thing on the plate available to us at the time. You can do it, but you have to have a conception of energy flux density conception of what the objectives are. If you have the right energy flux density, you can do it.